My name is Dima Kovalev. I'm the product manager in the trust and safety team at Uber. If you were here yesterday, saw Mike Caden give a talk about anonymization. This one's going to be somewhat similar. We're going to talk about the product side of things, but also how that relates to our city teams and also how that relates to our growth. Let's do it from here. We're going to talk a little bit about bits and atoms, what that means for Uber, network effects, the trust and safety team that I'm on, but also mostly about phone anonymization, as clearly we're at the Signal conference here for Twilio. So the question we're looking to answer today is how do you build and scale a system that enables users to communicate across the world while growing really, really quickly at Uber speed? For those of you that didn't see our redesign, you might have seen something about bits and atoms. And so the answer is really bits and atoms. So consider the bit, the building block of the digital world, invented about 70 years ago. But in its short life, it's changed the way we communicate, the way we do business, and the way we live every aspect of our lives. For Uber, this represents our technology. It's complex, it's precise, it's highly advanced. But when it's expressed, it's effortless and it's refined. And then think about the atom. If you think the bit is a big deal, consider the atom. It's born almost 14 billion years ago. It's responsible for everything, from BLT to moms everywhere to New York City. And for Uber, it signifies our rapidly improving cities, the goods that we move from place to place, and most importantly, the people that we serve. Interestingly enough, we organize our teams in a very similar fashion. Our engineering team is responsible for the bits. We have over 1,000 engineers in several offices across the world. They build great products that delight our users. Our operations team, we're a little bit different than most companies where our operations team is actually much bigger than our engineering team. We have thousands of ops that are across the world in each of our cities that help our business grow. They're coming up with innovative products that also delight our users. Those of you that ever pushed a button, gotten ice cream on demand, or had puppies delivered to your office for you to play with for a little while, those all come from our city teams. But their main responsibility is actually growing the business. David Sachs from Yammer made this chart a couple years ago about why Uber grows really, really quickly. Right? So the whole basic premise is that the network effect. You start with a couple driver partners. You make it easy for them to find customers, which means there's more demand. That brings more partners onto the platform. They cover a bigger area. That means you get faster pickups. Those partners have less downtime. You bring down prices, which means more demand. And this is true in our data. So when you look at New York City, for the last 4 years, the blue represents the amount of time that an average partner spends on trip. The gray is how much time they're off trip or waiting for customers. So each year, they're spending more and more time with customers. They're spending less time in between rides. They're more efficient. They're making more money. But more importantly, for you as a user, you're spending less time getting a ride. In most cities across the world, you can now get an Uber in under 3 minutes. So a little about me. I've actually seen both bits and atoms throughout my career. I started in Chicago as a city ops. Back then, we didn't have UberX. Taxi was actually the thing we were going to do for a low-end product or cost-efficient product. That's me on the street near a train station, onboarding taxi drivers with an iPad, kind of definition of ops hustle. We then launched UberX and said taxi wasn't the way we're going to go. So I switched to a launcher role, launched 24 markets in 2014, really seeing the intricacies of each local market across the US. And then we figured out that the people that know the atoms can probably teach a little bit to people that do the bits. So we built what was called product ops. We took those ops people from all across the world that knew the business and had them sit down next to the engineers, next to designers, next to the other product managers and said, look, when you build products, here's how you build them to scale to make sure the users that use them, you solve for the needs of the users that need them. And eventually, I took over as the product manager in the trust and safety team, leading a couple of different products. So the trust and safety team at Uber has two components. Again, it has engineering, and it also has operations. The engineering piece is focused on a bunch of different problems, but some of the ones you might know about are phone anonymization that we'll dive into, share my ETA, so you can share your status with friends and family, and ID verification, showing the person that's pictured in your app is the one that's actually driving the car. We also have that ops team. Safety is local. The needs of a user, or safety needs of a user in Cairo is going to be very different than the needs of a user in San Francisco. It's very different in India as well. So the ops team is responsible for process. They're responsible for protocols. They also come up with innovative solutions preventing incidents. One of my favorites is we actually ran a pilot of putting boppets in the back of cars. Sounds kind of strange, but drunk people, when distracted, don't cause safety incidents. Give them toys, they're kind of like children. At the end of the day, you see the impact. So it's a lighthearted way, but we are doing a lot of things to make sure that users on our platform stay safe. So let's talk about one of those users. Meet Brittany. She works late at night, and with Uber, she feels safer knowing that she doesn't have to go outside to hope that she can flag down a ride. Well, that sounds great. You're inside, you push a button, a car shows up. You get in that car. But it's not always that easy. Sometimes you have to call your driver. If you're at Signal, you have to figure out where are you, where to pick you up, all this other stuff. So communication between drivers and riders becomes super important. And not every pickup is perfect. We strive for a perfect pickup, but sometimes calling and texting is necessary. But just because you and your driver need to talk, that doesn't mean that you need to reveal your real information. Your privacy is also important to us. And if someone contacts you after the trip, whether you're a driver or a rider, it reduces your trust in Uber and our ability to protect your privacy. So let's talk about phone anonymization. The first version was built in 2012 by one engineer on Workation. Workation is essentially where a group of people from Uber go somewhere fun. They spend a week kind of like on a hackathon building something cool. So Dom, on this Workation, built kind of the first integration with Twilio, and it was built for 10 cities, ended up lasting for 10 years. This is Dom. I like to call it poolgramming, chilling in the pool, building things. And no, this is not where we came up with Uber Pool. But anyway, so V1 was a basic virtual system, very simple architecture. Internally, we called it Twilio. We'll get to that in a second. Essentially, every driver, every partner on our platform, we assign them a Twilio number. Each phone number is sticky, meaning that if a driver calls or texts his own number, he'll reach his rider. And riders could call from a different number for every, riders are called a different number for every driver. Kind of looked like a real number. This is roughly what it looked like. We have driver John, his number is A, his Twilio number is X. We have rider Sam, his phone number is B. Those are kind of the main components. So John calls his assigned number, which goes into Twilio. Twilio hits our API and says, hey, I have number A calling number X. What do you want me to do? We have to figure out, well, who's A and whose Twilio number is X. We know this is John calling his own number. Then we say, well, is John on a trip with someone? Yes, John's on a trip with Sam. And his number's B, so we turn that to Twilio and we say forward that call. Pretty simple, happens instantly and quickly. So what are the pros? It's a very simple solution. Drivers always, remember this is the time we also used to give out phones to partners. So those only had data plans. So partners would just call the same phone number from another phone, made it really simple, they would just press redial. It was also caller agnostic. If you've ever lost your phone in an Uber, you could pick up your friend's phone, knowing the driver's Twilio number and call it, and it would work. That's great. There's some cons to this system too. Lack of multi-data center support. If we ever need to fail over to a different data center, it's really hard to shift that traffic because it's dependent on a real-time system. Driver privacy. So drivers, essentially any rider could call almost any driver. Not great from a trust and safety perspective. And it's also not scalable. Maintaining numbers for every single driver is not cost effective. We also had some growing pains. This is roughly around the time we launched UberX. We started growing really, really quickly. That's that blue line on the left. We had tens of thousands of partners doing their first trip every single month by the time it came to December of 2014. So we were buying a ton of Twilio numbers for a lot of drivers. Also, this is when we started growing internationally. All this stuff's online. But essentially, you see that blue is US growth. We also started growing internationally. So it's that red dots. And you could buy thousands of numbers from Twilio in the US. But internationally, it's a lot more difficult, especially at our scale. And I mentioned that we called it Twilio internally. This is a launch email. See anything weird? Apparently, Twilio is in the business of hiding your phone number. So we, one of our developers called it the Twilio number internally. So internally, it's called Twilio. So eventually, our marketing managers started announcing Twilio as a product. Catalina, our rep, emailed me and says, hey, thanks, but can you kind of change that a little bit? It's not great. So anyway, so we built version 2. Mike Caden, you might have seen at the keynote, spoke yesterday, started building it, the foundation for Week 2. And here, basically, we started assigning phone numbers per trip instead of per driver. Much simpler, or kind of a little bit of a different architecture. The client makes a mapping. between caller and A and B. The anonymization system, which is that bottom black square that you see, returns numbers for each user to use. Notice how there's different numbers for voice and SMS as well. We communicate this mapping to Twilio, and essentially we now have a couple numbers per city as opposed to a couple numbers per driver. This is great. It's cost effective. It's scalable. We don't need to buy numbers for each partner. It enables us to scale our business across the world. We can support multiple data centers. Failovers are really easy. And more importantly, we can scale internationally. So all those 400 cities we are in now, it's much easier to support them because the lack of DID dependency kind of goes away. And we can also assign different phone numbers for voice and SMS. So not every market you can do communication over the same number. We have SMS or voice. So we can do some custom things there. The difficult part is that it creates a complex user experience. So the thing that I want to talk about today is kind of what are some of the product challenges that you think about when you roll out a system like this, assigning phone numbers per driver. Well, in this new system, it matters who calls, right? In the old system, a rider can just call a driver. In the new system, a rider's caller ID doesn't always match the number on their account. We all saw the cool SIM cards yesterday, which means that sometimes riders will switch their phone number. So you have to handle that use case. So you built this edit your phone number flow. If you ever requested an Uber, you'll actually see it right above the contact panel, where essentially when you go on a ride, you press contact and right above say, hey, is this your number? You can actually change that. If you change that number to the one that you're calling from, we'll map that to your driver. Lost items actually become really interesting. If you lose your phone, we need to know where to reach you. So if you go to your help app, you can also type in a new phone number. We'll call you and then connect to your driver, all without revealing information about you or your driver. In Mexico, for those of you that have built apps in Mexico, there's a one problem. So what do we mean by that? So this is a kind of a call log from between a driver and the rider. What you'll see, that top bar is the number that comes in. So when you have a call that comes in, it's missing that one. It's a normal call. That's the country code and then kind of the Twilio number that we own. And it's trying to forward that phone call. But in order to forward that phone call, you have to add a 1. So what does that mean? That means that the caller ID of the person that's calling you is different than the way you have to place that outbound phone call. Creates challenge dependencies in our system. So we built what we called internally as a mobile terminating flow, or an inbound flow, or really outbound flow. Essentially, you go to your app, you will press contact, and instead of calling a number, kind of how that lost item piece works, you just press call, and we'll connect you. This was great. I was like, oh my God, we're going to solve all the problems. This is going to be fantastic. It's going to work. It didn't. It really, our users hated it. In Mexico, they're just like not fans of the system. So instead, Mike, the engineer I mentioned earlier, just made him fix it on the back end. So essentially now dynamically, our back end will fix the numbers based on who's calling. We'll add or remove that number depending if you want to place that phone call or you want to receive that phone call. So sometimes we don't have the same capacity or same capability for both voice and SMS numbers across the world. So what that means is that we have one number that can support voice and another number that can support SMS. So I said, let's build it. Right? Worked with my developers, said, okay, cool. This is actually what you're seeing is what the driver app would look like in in Australia. You can have one phone number for calling and a different phone number for SMS. So we can roll out this anonymization system kind of in a hacky way, but letting users use one number for one purpose and one number for another purpose. Here's the problem, though. Every country is different. So now the driver app and the rider app dynamically have to think about all of these crazy different use cases. So in the US, that's what the driver app looks like. You just have a call button and you have a message button. In Australia, you have two different phone numbers. So you have to tell the driver and the rider, hey, use this number for calling and this number for messaging. In South Africa, we do what we said was the mobile terminating flow. So there, lack of SMS increased the cost to our partners. So we basically said, okay, well, if you can't SMS, how do we reduce your cost? Well, an incoming phone call is free. So for drivers, essentially they press a button, we call them, we connect with the rider. For riders, the app looks exactly the same, except you just don't have an SMS button. In India, a lot of our partners lease devices, which means they don't own their phone. They essentially just borrow it from Uber, which means back to that phone doesn't have a calling plan. It only has a data plan. So in that permutation, we have to actually show them the phone number to call, and they dial it themselves. So those of you that have ever built mobile apps, having 4 different permutations that's based on the geography of where the app is live is crazy. So my engineers aren't big fans of when I propose these hacky solutions. But again, you have to understand the intricacies of each local market, and the way we build these things is for the local needs of our users. And the one that is really important is that not everyone wants to call, right? If you've ever requested an Uber, sometimes you say, hey, look, I don't want my driver to call me. I just want to get in the car. But we're actually talking about something a little different. Has anyone ever seen this screen in their app here that's requested? And 1 or 2 people. If you read the fine print, it tells you that this driver is actually asking for a destination because they're deaf or hard of hearing. We actually have hundreds of these partners on the platform. To make communication easier between you and them, we basically say, look, if you type in a destination, make it easier for them to take you where you need to go. Well, an awesome feature. This is great. But when it comes to messaging and calling, essentially calling them won't do much, right? It's actually kind of an awkward experience because they have to keep declining your phone call. So when we know a partner is deaf or hard of hearing, what we do is we actually block the calling ability in your app so you can only text them. But this creates an operational challenge. We can't roll out this kind of anonymization system across the world unless we have SMS in a market, which, again, until we get SMS in a market, we can't roll out because we really care about the user experience of these partners. So what did we learn today? Network effects are powerful, right? More drivers means more demand, which means more drivers, right? It kind of goes in a loop. Build products that scale, right? The first integration we built with Twilio lasted 2+ years. We're hoping this current one lasts a couple more years. Right now, we're rolling out Uber Eats and Uber Rush, which means that our partners are now not only communicating with one rider or one person, they're actually doing 10 or 15 deliveries, which means they have to communicate with people out of order. So we're building a system for that as well. And understand the local needs of your users. So if your drivers or riders or your users are in a different place, not where you operate, you really have to get to know that market. We're fortunate that we have operations teams across the world that know the intricacies of those markets. But when you build things, think about their experiences because it might be different than the one yours. That's it for me. If you have questions, I'll take them in the hall.